Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name's Tyne Sumner. I work here in the digital studio on a range of different research and projects. I'm very excited to welcome you today to this wonderful presentation. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered here on the lands of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to their elders past and present and any Aboriginal people that may be in the room here today. First of all, I'd like to introduce Chris. Chris Rodley is a new media artist who's been a digital writer for BuzzFeed. Infamous, I have in brackets here, so I'm not sure if I'm prefacing the in or just stating infamous for creating the magic realism bot, which regularly tweets mini stories. Chris has also used artificial intelligence magic to create floral dinosaurs. He's completing a PhD at Sydney in transmedia art, and he has generated storytelling algorithms for large data sets. He collaborates with creative developer Andrew Borrell. And with Andrew, and Chris is working on a collaborative work called Death of an Alchemist. This was recently exhibited at 2 international shows: the Electronic Literature Organisation Interventions Exhibition in Norway, and the International Symposium on Electronic Art, New Text Show in Vancouver. I had the pleasure yesterday of seeing Chris speak at ACME on artificial intelligence and Shakespearean texts, where we saw some Shakespearean actors perform magically computer-generated pieces of theatre. I'm not sure we'll have that today, but nevertheless, this paper sounds excellent. It's called Artificial Arts, Textual Creativity in the Age of AI. Chris will speak for about 40 minutes, and then I'll go to questions. And if in fact you'd like to stay around after the talk and questions for some more demonstration and discussion with Chris, I'm told that he'll be here for a little bit longer afterwards. So please join with me in thanking him for this paper.
Thanks so much for that. And yes, we are colour coordinated sheerly through serendipity. Okay, I just have to remember which computer I'm using. Yeah, so hey guys, I wanted to make this a bit less formal than it sounds, or maybe it sounded in the description. So yeah, rather than just showing you, sort of telling you about all the stuff I've done, yeah, I thought I would cover a range of sort of interesting and useful information for you guys in a casual way. But I am going to start with just contextualizing this in terms of my own story, just because it's a kind of a way into the narrative. And I'm going to try and, yeah, so I sort of see this as like a multifunction talk. So I'll do a sort of an overview of what I've done and how I did it. And then I'll give you a quick 5-minute cheat sheet on precisely what is sort of neural computing or neural artworks, what is all this kerfuffle about AI. And then I thought it would be most useful for you guys to actually sort of dive into some of the technology and make it work with your, with your input, so we can sort of do it live. So yeah, kind of what we did. Was anyone else there? No. Just wondering if I can repeat any of my material. Yeah, so to start off with, okay. So yeah, just a quick, sort of primer on some of the key terms being used in this space. So there's a whole bunch of buzzwords, as you'll be aware, and they're actually, the truth is, they're really poorly defined, and the definitions shift over the past decade or two. And so to give you the sort of my current take on the landscape, AI describes a kind of computing that seeks to emulate human skills and abilities. There's been a push to kind of rebrand it as anthropic computing to sort of get away from the glamorization or the kind of AI magic that is used by every AI artist, including myself, sadly, and by many companies working in this space. They sort of sprinkle some AI magic on it. So AI is just software. So we're just talking about programs. here, computer programs. What makes it unique, the particular AI that's been developed over the past, say, 10, 15 years, is that with machine learning and deep learning, is that it allows us to carry out the kinds of operations that humans do without thinking. So that the kinds of operations that we think of as extremely simple, like recognizing a spoon, right? Or hearing your name in a crowded room. It seems sort of transparent, doesn't even seem like it is a skill. But in fact, it's extremely difficult skill and a lot more difficult than arithmetic or teaching computers how to play chess. So the really significant thing, and the reason we're here today, I guess, is about the past 10 years, is that we've seen a huge leaps forward in this kind of childlike, almost, in its childlike skills of recognizing patterns. So most of what we're talking about today is about this kind of pattern recognition technology that has accelerated rapidly. Just a couple of the quick definitions before we start. So robots and bots, didn't make the PowerPoint slide. So the bot is the sort of virtual form of the robot, essentially just another program. Algorithms, again, it describes essentially a program as well. So an algorithm is a set of instructions, like a recipe. You might think of it as a kind of a style of architecture. We talk about the architecture of these neural networks. We talk about how they're made. In the work that we're about to see, there are two main kinds of these neural networks, recurrent and convolutional, which I won't go into. This type of algorithm, or this type of programming, was loosely inspired by the human brain, by the structure of the brain. And as you might be aware, neural networks, it's not by any means a new term. They've been around since the dawn of artificial intelligence in the 1950s, in fact, since before then. It's only quite recently that they've started to work really, really well. There was some promise in the 90s, but yeah, over the past 10 years, we've seen huge advances in this particular kind of machine learning. So as deep learning is a subset of machine learning, which uses neural networks to detect patterns in text, image, and music. All right, that's probably enough of the boring stuff. All right, so now I just wanted to take it back to something personal. So yeah, this is there's nothing really check that for whether it was appropriate. Yeah, so this is my earliest piece of automated art, sort of artificial art. So yeah, this is actually made by my dad on an ancient Microsoft Excel macro. Yeah, and so this was a sort of first time, I guess, I kind of had this interest in combining technology and literature. And what I sort of realized is that computers were quite good at doing something that I couldn't, which is thinking around corners. So tend to think in those well-trodden neural pathways. You don't tend to associate, you don't associate at all, an almond with a trombone. And nor would you, maybe nor would you want to. But what it does help you to sort of produce surprising images. So this is you'll be aware, perhaps this is a sort of combinatory creativity, combinatoric creativity that is, has a long history. Mozart himself is alleged to have written a game, so a combinatorial game, which used dice to compose music by chance. So that's sort of where I started, combining and recombining fragments of text with fellow new media artist Andrew Burrell in Sydney. We sort of took that a stage further around 5 years ago by exploring how we could remix not just text that we'd created, but the huge goldmine of data that was kind of welling up at the time. So this was the Death of an Alchemist work, which was a couple of years ago, actually. So that recombines text from a wide range of sources. So the images are from Tumblr. You have tweets, news headlines, Wikipedia pages. And so we sort of created this as a novel. So it technically, or in many places, made sense. So the idea was to kind of create coherence, not just a random stream of images. Yeah, so that's how we first entered this broad space. But yeah, you'll notice I haven't described this as an AI work. This was at the beginning of my PhD, when really everyone was talking about big data, when AI wasn't a catchphrase yet. And so the past sort of 4 to 5 years of my PhD have been a pretty crazy ride of moving from that big data that people used to talk about 5 years ago to AI. A little bit out of order, but this is Magic Realism Bot, which was also mentioned. So again, this is not relying on big data. This is relying on the first technique of this combinatoric prepared texts. So I made this with my sister. In fact, it's probably better to say my sister made it with me. Yeah, so created a huge corpus of words and sentences. And actually, let's go and see how it's doing. Yeah, and it uses those to tweet. Actually, maybe we'll do that afterwards. I'll get back to the. Is that from the beginning or something? Damn. Yeah. So yeah. Again, interested in the way that technology and literature could be combined. So after I'd explored data, I found myself frustrated with the really randomness of it. So the way that data was really messy. If you've, if you search Twitter, you think that you're going to get back tweets, but in fact, what you get back is a whole bunch of often bot tweeted kind of garbage. You get back a lot of tweets in other languages, and you get back a lot of stuff that's frankly incomprehensible. So it's very hard to harness all this data that's out there. And this sort of led my PhD to a kind of a dead end, and that's when I decided to make Magic Realism Bot, because this type of technology has a 1,000-year-old history, right? So this idea of just using chance to produce texts goes back to the I Ching and to musical kites in China and a bunch of other techniques, to Mozart. So, and we know that it can produce really compelling text if you do it carefully. The problem with this is that it's highly crafted, as they say in AI. So I've been able to create a cohesive sentence there, a cohesive premise for a magic realist story, and it was able to do this. Still tweets 10 times a day. Problem is that there's nothing really surprising that's going to come out of it. It's deterministic. So yeah, it was kind of at a bit of a dead end with the sort of merging of technology and arts, where the data didn't really seem to produce anything highly meaningful. This sort of huge tidal wave of data, and this type of approach is extremely labor-intensive, and also is ultimately kind of deterministic. So it's not really surprising. So now I wanted to turn to the subject of the talk. It's important, though, to get across those two previous domains, because I wanted to really distinguish for you guys today what everyone is talking about with AI and neural networks, why specifically they are significant. So what's their sort of specific, what do they let you do that you couldn't do before? So I've described these as three key techniques: generation, translation, and personalization. The first one is really the most spectacular, perhaps. This is a neural network called a DC-GAN. So it's a adversarial neural network. So yeah, it's a program that is inspired by the brain, human brain, as all of these neural networks are. And it's an adversarial network, which means there's two components. One component is generating pictures of bedrooms. So these are machine-generated pictures of bedrooms. The other one, and it's trying to fool a judge. So you kind of have an artist, and then you have an art critic. And the artist, the computer artist, is trying to persuade the critic that its drawings of bedrooms are real. And gradually it sort of learns by itself to detect, gradually it learns how to create a sort of an image that looks like a bedroom. And this is only possible because of the enormous tidal wave of data that I mentioned before, which means that there's this huge stack of photographs of bedrooms. Many of the kind of striking cultural advances in this area have been related to areas of human cultural activity where there's lots of data. So yesterday at ACME, we focused on Shakespeare, and we also were looking there at generation, but not generation as in here of images or photographs. We're looking at generation of Shakespearean English. And so we played some generated Shakespeare and then some sort of variations of it. Maybe we can, if we get some time later, I can play some of those for you. So again, Shakespeare works particularly well for this type of technique because Shakespeare, of course, wrote so much. And I described how it was kind of difficult to find Australian texts to generate in this way because we don't have really that many, we don't have prolific authors, playwrights whose corpus all sort of sounds similar. And then eventually I realized that we actually do. We have Home and Away and Neighbours. So that's been my sort of, what's that? Well, we have David Williamson, but there was a kind of an issue there with, because I believe he once sued the Sydney Theatre Company. He once sued Wayne Harrison, the director, at Sydney. Yeah, no, because he used like a set, like he didn't like the set and like he didn't like the production. So I was like, I might steer clear of that. But yeah, no, David Williamson would be perfect, I think, because you have a corpus, a bunch of data that is reasonably consistent. And so this is also perfect. One of the lovely examples we can look at later if we chat is there's a bird database. So there's a big ornithological database with a bird and a matching description of the bird. So the common sort of theme with these types of artworks is that we are generating imitations of the real thing. And I guess a potential critique here is that, it's what the computational creativity people call just mere generation. So we're merely sort of imitating what's already out there. And, if you heard this Shakespeare yesterday, you might say, well, it did possibly fool people into thinking that it was from Timon of Athens, or it could. I don't know about you, but, by the time you get to Act 4 or Act 5 of King Lear, or particularly King Lear, which I've seen about 5 times, you tend to flag and all those prithys and yea, verily start to sound the same. And so, yeah, okay, we can fool an audience into thinking that this is Shakespeare, this is bad Shakespeare. But why would we want to do that? So luckily, that's not all that this type of technology can do. So go back to our internet. So Google Translate, which I probably don't need to bring up for you, really represents a different type of technology driven by AI. And I don't know if you remember, really, 10 years ago, online translation was very, very bad. And essentially, the program was looking up each word in the dictionary individually. Now, machine translation is very, very good. And I know Douglas Hofstadter, the sort of AI cognitive scientist and philosopher, said, I think only 7 or 8 years ago, that machines would never successfully translate Proust into English or something. And it was a particularly unfortunate time to say that because he then had to kind of, that was precisely the time when machine translation really proved itself. So here we have something that's not quite generation, right? So we're not just mimicking, we're actually performing something useful. And what we're doing is we're finding concordances, or we're finding similarities, points of correspondence between 2 corpuses. The name for the technology among computer sciences is sequence to sequence. And there's a wide range of uses for this. So again, yesterday, I showed how we could use this type of technology not just to generate texts, which aren't very satisfying, but to translate one text into another text simply by sort of treating Shakespeare as a sort of a foreign language. So we go to, what is it? So in the realm of images, this sort of type of process of translation becomes particularly interesting. So you'll be familiar probably, or maybe from the poster, with this type of artistic practice called style transfer. So while the underlying technologies are quite different, it's the same principle here of translating one concept or one creation, one cultural form into another. So I was actually fairly, let's go to my website. I was fairly unimpressed actually by the stuff that had been done, by the work that had been produced. Yeah. And that is because, go here, when this programming architecture called style transfer was developed, it was used initially just to kind of translate modern art styles, I say that in quote marks, onto selfies. So we find with this type of cultural practice that it's often used for these purposes of these novelties, and it becomes very sort of visually sort of saturated. So what I did is use this technique in what I hoped were sort of novel ways. So this was the inspiration for me. So this was on Reddit. Someone had style transferred, I still don't know what. So the base image there, so the composition is Jacques-Louis David's quite famous portrait of Napoleon. And I don't know, what do you think? It looks to me like some sort of apparel, some sort of drapery has been transferred onto it. This immediately struck me, and many others on Reddit, as being really strikingly different. I don't know about you, but I find often in contemporary arts, there is a real paucity, a lack of really visually revolutionary, surprising type of imagery. So I checked it out, and yeah, so one of the revelations for me was that this type of technology was not actually difficult to use, because very soon after these algorithms are developed, folks will take them to GitHub and sort of share the code, and then from there, they're often will have been translated into these user-friendly sort of web platforms, like that one I brought up before. So here, I simply translated, the Muppets. I think it was a selection of Muppets and Sesame Street characters. And so this type of style transfer obviously is a simple kind of extension of the technique from sort of Picasso and Van Gogh into sort of pareidolia. So we're sort of intentionally creating that phenomenon whereby a cloud looks like a kangaroo. So this one I particularly like. It's sort of Picasso, not as the style of artwork, but Picasso sort of as the content, and in the style of sort of flat-looking Muppets. Yeah, and see some more examples here. So again, what's the point of all this? Well, I actually, frankly, didn't do this as art. I was just doing this as a kind of a experimentation. Again, this is the famous Hieronymus Bosch, translated for the under 5 set. And this one, probably my favorite image, is of course the Birth of Venus, but it's been translated into the style of human blood vessels. So that's an image of the human brain actually during neurosurgery, so a live brain. So what's happening there is that the algorithm is detecting two distinct features of the image, the content, and disambiguating them, sorry. So disambiguating the content, so the composition, from the line, the tone, the color, and macaroni. All right, so again, this is fairly, what's the point of all this sort of novelty, you might ask? It really wasn't a point. I just was something I was tweeting. But it actually has, I think, interesting implications. For a start, I wanted to note that novelties like this are exactly how film began. So with, of course, the phenakistoscope in the 19th century. Yeah, so I've been interested in exploring these sort of techniques a little further. Let me go back here. So if I can get a suggestion from you guys. So actually, maybe we can do that in a demonstration afterwards. I was going to invite you guys to sort of suggest a style image, and we'll see if we can translate it onto the base image. I also want to invite you to propose, if any of you wanted to propose a data set, a textual data set that we could run towards the end of this session. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So coming back to this work. So my learning curve sort of continued when I made these. So same sort of principle here. These are obviously dinosaurs. And something maybe more unusual has happened here. So a little bit more than just a novelty or something grotesque. It's really, again, produced kind of an image that looks to me distinctly like a human didn't do it. So I don't know about you, but maybe it looks like something a human did. The level of complexity in images and the sort of fine-grained detail of how that transformation was made. So the way that, so to explain, it was a very plain image of dinosaurs, public domain, sort of images of dinosaurs. And I found a vintage lithograph, sort of chromolithograph of flowers, not really by chance, but as part of a systematic exploration of how this technology works. So yeah, this was a sort of product of, successful product of, many thousands of sort of practice tests. So I was really surprised by the reaction here because I got huge bunch of people who continue to email me now asking for the image so they can put it on a t-shirt. So here are just some more examples. But what really surprised me was that I somehow unwittingly had sort of defied the expectations of the AI experts, because I found a paper where this noted creativity expert had said, well, AI is all well and good, but it will never, neural networks will never match the skill of a human artist like Archimboldo, who is famous for creating precisely these types of images. And in fact, I think she specifically said, we'll never sort of be able to create this type of effect where you rethink a body in terms sort of as made up not of limbs and hair and organs, but of fruit. And I was like, no, I already did that. So yeah, I mean, and that's I've made just as inaccurate predictions, so that's not meant to in a fie in your face sort of fashion. Actually, I know as soon as I do that, that makes an I'd make some absolute howler. In fact, I came very close to publishing something in a prominent, well, a fairly non-prominent place, which described the Twitter bot, if you remember horse ebooks, famous beloved feature of the early Twitter, as a genuine bot. And soon after I sent that off, it was revealed to be just a human. So yeah. So the other sort of fascinating thing about this is that I got other calls from academics, like some cognitive, some computational neuroscientists that wanted to know my sort of secret sauce, my algorithm for doing this kind of stuff, which I didn't really know how to answer. And I started to realize that there's maybe something here. I was initially a skeptic of work made with AI because there's been many years of sort of overselling it and overhyping it. But yeah, I guess I'm here to try and persuade you that there's something more to this. So how are we going for time? So yeah, on the rundown, it asked me to sort of reflect on the social implications of this type of technology. Sorry, the wider sort of cultural and social implications and the implications to humanities. Going back to the slides, there's a bunch of implications and I think a bunch of myths as well. If we could just quickly cover those, and then maybe if you guys want to generate some stuff, we can do that. Particularly interested if you have any ideas for text corpuses that you'd like to see sort of regenerated, because there's a pretty neat process you can do with recurrent neural networks where you throw it some data and it learns the characteristics of it, and then you can actually provide a seed for that data, and it will recreate, it will finish the sentence in the style of the corpus you've provided. So yesterday at ACME, people were able to suggest like sentences like starting, the deep web is, and I was able to kind of reveal how Shakespeare would have finished that sentence. So if there's a songwriter, for instance, that you particularly like, but they've died young, and you want to see how their text corpus might have grown if they'd survived, that's the sort of thing we can do. You might notice that the sort of size of those text samples is quite small, and that's true. So usually for this type of work, and this is a example of a generated 8-bit video game. Usually you need a huge corpus to do this type of thing, which is one of the reasons why it wasn't available. Which is one of the reasons why the technology wasn't available until recently. But yeah, there's a few workarounds where you can train it on your Tori Amos, your favorite singer, your favorite composer, and then you can sort of supplement that corpus with a few million other words. So there's a bunch of implications, like I said, for society and culture. Probably the most, one of the most striking is the social implications. So this is Alexa. If you've, it's just started glowing. Yeah, and so, sorry, she's just responding. I'm going to unplug her, sadly. So one of the implications of this type of work is that art becomes social, is that creative work becomes social. So this is a really fundamental, epochal kind of change in how we think of art. I'd compare it again to the rise of film and the notion that you could edit time, the notion of time as an art form. So with bots or robots, we have a real possibility at last of creating interactions that are meaningful and sort of not just novelties. So obviously, sort of robot-like devices have existed before. The difference now is that thanks to this deep learning technology, which, as I said, is really good at pattern recognition, the vital kind of last mile in these robots, which was the fact that they were really bad at recognizing speech and images, that's kind of been solved. The problem is that artistically, I think no one's really found anything interesting to do with these robots yet. I don't know if anyone has a Google Home or a Google or a Amazon Alexa. Really shockingly sad kind of skills they have on there, like thousands of skills, but the top skill in the world last time I checked on Alexa was like a fart joke. So you could ask for a joke, and then another was games for your toddlers. Like there was some storytelling apps that were just really abysmal. So yeah, one of the sort of cultural implications here is that there's a whole bunch of opportunity that is not being exploited. So the second implication I wanted to sort of discuss is the implications for arts and culture itself. Many people like to bang on about the death of the author, or the sort of the death of the author again, as this type of work represents, where we see the human author sort of replaced by the machine generating the text. I didn't want to get caught up in that debate because it's I find it well, let's put it this way, enough other people are sort of engaging that debate that I can sort of step back. But I did want to talk about how so another implication of this type of work for creative practice and for the humanities, and that's regarding the nature of creative work itself. So to create this type of thing, this type of work requires a kind of combination of technical expertise and cultural knowledge that I think we've lost the ability that we don't often see combined anymore. Certainly in the Renaissance, many of the famous Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle painters, they also were keen recreational mathematicians. When perspective was introduced, according to Vasari, it was this widespread discussion in Florence of this new mathematical tool. It was discussed over the dinner table with the Medicis. Really, I think it's fair to say that there's been that the two cultures notion of C.P. Snow is true today, and that we've seen a splitting between arts and science. So that's both a problem and an opportunity. It's a problem if we want better culture. So, like I said, that this technology has not produced really compelling work yet, I don't think, and I think it'll probably continue to produce stuff that's technically impressive, like these bedrooms, but kind of depressing as well. Kind of actually the best example of that is the style transfer itself, where it's like, do we really need to see another like bad pseudo Van Gogh? I'm sort of not sure how long I should leave for questions. Yeah, cool. There's a huge gap at the moment. I also think there's a huge opportunity for folks that sort of jump in and explore this stuff. One of the fascinating things I learned was that, really how easy it was really to create stuff in this area that was new and exciting to people. So I got mentioned in a tweet by the German Max Planck Institute, their main sort of Twitter account, sort of describing me as though I had sort of made some, great transformational breakthrough. And at the time I didn't really know how any of this worked. I was just sort of futzing around with the user-friendly platform that the programmers provided. It's a kind of a green fields where I think the technology has been sort of underhyped, which you might find a strange perspective. But despite all of the increasing AI hype that we see, you might be familiar with my least favorite robot, Sophia. Anyone knows Sophia? Sort of a human-ish looking sort of android with really bad kind of makeup, and I think who's made an honorary citizen of Saudi Arabia. Unlike robots like that, I think there's really exciting art to be made here. I guess my message today is that it's kind of easier than you might think, and that there's sort of way more opportunities than you might think. The historical parallel, I think, for me, is really striking between now and the early years of film. So in the 1890s, there were very few people interested in film. It was seen as, a kind of a joke, cinema of attractions. So really novelty and spectacle. And in the early years, it took surprisingly long for them to stop just plonking a camera down in front of a vaudeville act. So poor Thomas Edison, who maybe fair enough, he had other inventions to pioneer, but his film studios, if you go and look in the sort of archives, the sort of public domain archives, he was pumping out these films, and they were all just completely boring and sort of mimetic. So again, not doing anything with the form of theatre or vaudeville, and not really adapting that art form at all to the new affordances of this medium. He made two films about rubbish. Like, he made two films about like gathering the rubbish and dumping it on steamers in New York Harbor. Which, although I described it to someone and they said, "Oh, that sounds so cool," but when you think that they had never filmed, a close-up or even really a narrative at that point, or a chase or a fight, it seems striking. But of course, that's how technologies work. They take a while to be discovered. Yeah, I might wrap it up soon. Oh yeah, maybe to end on the film analogy. So there's some interesting parallels, I think, there, because I think this is the birth of potentially a medium that is as transformational and as impactful as film was in the 20th century. So that's how important I think it could be to arts and culture, let alone society. And so I think we can maybe learn a little bit from the experiences of those in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, both positive and negative. So yeah, we saw the tech companies back then, the equivalent of the Google and Amazon, which was like the Edison Studios. We saw them really drop the ball on wanting to control the technology, but not really having the cultural knowledge and the sort of broad-based insights to make interesting stuff with it. So Edison, he kind of messed up, right? That's why we don't all go to Edison movies now. So he didn't really see the sort of cultural potential of the medium. But we can also see, I think, positive examples for us today in folks like George Méliès and others, the sort of pioneers of early narrative film or early sort of innovations in film grammar that used, I think, the type of technique that is required today, which is a iterative workshop kind of process where you experiment with the technology, see what happens, make mistakes, and then try again. And crucially, you have an audience that helps you kind of improve, which is what sort of Méliès had. So yeah, he's a real inspiration for me. I'm going to wrap it up. And yeah, if you guys have any questions or indeed suggestions for, oh, should I let you introduce that? Yeah, suggestions for anything you might want to sort of see generated or transformed by AI.
Great, yeah. That was really fascinating. Lots of thought-provoking points and questions. Please join me in the Thanks.